This says, morning, question for Roy McTaggart. How can voters trust your judgment and integrity if in silence or in action you have stood by a perpetrator?
Barry, the only thing I can, doesn't say specifically, but the only thing I can think that they are speaking of is with the situation with our Speaker in the House.
Yeah, they do go on for another question, and they do name Makiva Bush in the second part.
Well, that was a very difficult situation to deal with. And the truth of the matter is, Barry, and a very simple answer to this is the situation we faced would have, in terms of removing and speaking out against disciplining the Speaker as a result of that incident, it would have resulted in the collapse of the government. That is a fact. Now, try as I could and try as I might within the confines of what was happening back then when this all happened, people need to remember we were in the midst of a pandemic and simply unable, and also dealing with the effects of the blacklisting. So those are the two very significant crises that the country was facing. It is incorrect for people to say I never spoke out, because in February when this incident happened, I did speak out on social media. But we continued, and we felt it was in the best interest of the country that we not abandon everything to go after the one person, that the courts would deal, and ultimately justice would be served by the courts. And so we let that thing take its course. Following his trial, the issue just never died, and it continued to be a real issue. We saw it happening, and that again is one of the reasons why we decided that we would go ahead and ask the governor to call for early elections, and let the public decide his fate.
There is the question, the way this listener has phrased this, it's basically the same question but posed differently because you weren't in the government. It says, question for the remaining candidates. If given the opportunity, will you form a government with, or which includes, convicted criminals such as Makiva Bush? We'll start over here with Emily DeCoux.
Unequivocally, I would not form a government with Makiva Bush. It goes against my personal principles due to what he was convicted for. And I know that I could continue to serve the Georgetown East constituency with utmost unwavering representation, even if I was not a part of the same government if elected. We need to, as leaders, make it clear to our community what we do and do not stand for. And unequivocally, I do not stand for gender-based violence. The culture that it brings to the community by not holding a leader like that accountable for their actions is that misogyny and gender-based violence are acceptable. Mr. McTaggart alluded to the fact that the court would find justice for the victim, and I could not disagree more personally. From what I've observed, that victim was not served any justice due to how the Speaker's actions were handled by government. In fact, it was probably quite honestly the opposite. As somebody who stands for equality for all, it's just an integral part of my core principle that I would not work alongside somebody who has demonstrated that sort of action against a member of their community.
Thank you for that response. Next candidate, Christina Hislop-Rollinson.
Sure. So, I mean, we have a situation where our law allows candidates to have certain records. And I think we need to go to the law and see, look, do we need to update that and amend that? Do we want candidates to have clear records, right? Because I'm not a judgmental person, so who's to say that offense is greater than that offense, right? Obviously, when it comes to people who are holding public office, the role of the Speaker is a very high-profile position. So I think the right thing for Mr. Bush to have done would have been to step down in the interest of our international standing and continued government, and also to really prevent calling of early elections, which I think was quite unprecedented. And it's only done a disservice, I think, to new and upcoming candidates and also to the electorate. So I think that should have been avoided at all costs. But I certainly believe that he needs to take personal actions for that responsibility. And but I certainly, I mean, if you look at all the ministers and ordinary people, you know, everybody, you know, has weaknesses. What I did appreciate with Mr. Bush was that he apologized straight away, and I think he is getting help with some of the issues that he has. I think that's really important. But we need to have more help for people who are suffering addictions in this country, and it's certainly, you know, somebody who's holding public office should not be suffering from some of these issues that plague our society, because we're here to lead the way.
Thank you.
To encourage others to follow in, you know.
Thank you.
having more
Richard
control.
Bernard?
Yeah, first of all, let me say, Barry, people in public office should be held at a higher standard than those in the community. They are representatives, they are in leadership, and for you to lead, you have to have followers. So if you are leading blindly, then you are misleading the people as well. Now, other than having academics, to be a leader, you need integrity. You need to have character. And if those are lacking, then you're in problems. The present administration has a lot of educated people, but they are not using common sense. Thank you.
Thank you for that response, Dr. McField.
Well, first of all, Barry, I'm not a hypocrite, and I know what kind of society I come from. And I know what kind of society, what kind of past it had. It had a slave past. It had people being beaten and whipped, and women being disrespected in every way. And nobody talks about that. I lived in a family, I grew up in a family where there was domestic violence all the time, trauma all the time for the children. I write about it in Downside Up. I write about it in Time Long and Rope. I write about it in everything I do. I lived in a society where seamen went to sea and came back and drank and fought and did all these things. And all of a sudden people come in with different values and they start criticizing us and criminalizing us and destroying us for everything because they say their values are different than ours, when these are the same people that set the situation up. I am not going to be a part of destroying anybody that has done anything good in their lives to try to help people. And McKeever has tried to help people. And if this situation happened, and all people can do is focus on, because of their liberal values and their values about respect, we need to respect everybody, and not go to this point of this crucifixion simply because of this. I am not saying what he's did is right, because what I know, a lot of things that I've done have been wrong.
30
but
seconds.
We have to look at the circumstances, and we have to look about what we're getting rid of and what we're bringing into this situation. We are too one-sided because of the dominance in this society of particular people and their values.
Thank you for that response. And for Roy McTaggart, to be fair, if given the opportunity, would you form a government with McKeever Bush?
Let me start first by saying, Barry, that I have a beautiful wife, and I've raised 3 children, and I have 2 grandchildren. I don't tolerate, nor do I accept that agree that it is acceptable that there should be gender violence and violence against women. I know that Mr. Bush was asked to resign many times. So I leave that where it is. I am presenting, and have presented to the country, a team of candidates comprising progressives and what I call, we've termed alliance members. At the moment, we are 12. If we are successful at the polls, we can form a government. But you will also see very conspicuously that the former speaker is not a part of that team. Would I have him in my cabinet? I'm afraid not.
Thank you for that response. There's an opportunity for a 30-second rebuttal. Would any candidate want to take me up on that? Emily DeCoux?
I'd have to personally disagree with you, Frank, rather. I don't think it's a liberal view to show respect. And quite frankly, I think that when you assault a member of the community, nothing good that, quote unquote, good that you've done for your community is valid anymore. When you display an evident disrespect for members of your community, it undoes, in my view, the quote unquote good you've done.
Okay. Thank you for that response. 30-second, anybody else?
Yes, but look, that's an abstract value. Practical values is what we all experience. We're talking about the community, the composition, the culture of the community, and responses of people. And she was talking about people having treatment, trying to correct the situation. And all we're doing is we have a situation, per person that has a high profile, but what about all the domestic violence? I was the one who created the Battered Woman Center there because I know what domestic violence is like. But
Please wrap.
But
Please
we
wrap.
everything needs to be in context.
Okay. I need you to
Everything
wrap.
needs to be in context.
Any other candidate want 30 seconds? Christina.
Are we having time to answer the question about the composition of the next government, or do we answer that right now?
You've all done 2 minutes on that.
Okay, sure. So I guess I'll cover that in my extra 30 seconds. In the last election, independents had the most votes, right? There wasn't any party that got a majority vote. So in a sense, according to the Constitution, we should have, the MLA should have gone to the Legislative Assembly at that time and voted for Premier. That's what the Constitution sets out. So I'd really like to hear from the Governor on this in terms of how he's going to handle it this time around. Because certainly, if the independents do as well as they did last time, plus gain some more independents, the independents can form a government. You only need 10 to form a government. In the PPM party at the moment, they have less than 10, which is why they need the alliance
Need you to conclude.
members. So just wanted to make that clear that within that party, they won't have a majority for that 10 to really form a government. Which I
Richard
think
or
is key.
Roy, would you like a 30-second?
Domestic violence should be definitely disallowed. We have laws against it. So whoever are the perpetrators, not just the courts should decide, but their own personal integrity. Now, in this instance with Mr. Bush, yes, they allowed it to go to court. The court made their ruling. He had a conviction, so he personally should have resigned. Since he didn't resign, the House should have forced him to resign. And since that didn't happen, this is why we are where we are right now, calling early elections.
Okay.
You had some of the candidates had printed material for the 26th of May. They had to all change that for 6 weeks earlier. This is preposterous.
Thank you for that response. Mr. McTaggart? No 30 seconds. We'll move on to the next question.